Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Namaha Om Vishnupadaya Krishna-presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami-niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advait Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Shri Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhuvya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So Hare Krishna, dear devotees, dear Prabhujis, we are reading from Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 3rd, Karma Yoga, and we are going to read the 7th verse. So another very beautiful verse from Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter. Lord Shri Krishna, he is continuing his instructions to Arjun ji, and he is trying to explain Karma Yoga in detail. So Lord Shri Krishna in the 7th verse, he says to Arjun ji, Yastva indriyani manasa niyamya arabate Arjuna karmendriya karma yogam asaktaha sa vishishyate. So very beautiful verse. Yastva indriyani manasa niyamya arabate Arjuna karmendriya karma yogam asaktaha sa vishishyate. Yastva indriyani manasa niyamya arabate Arjuna karmendriya karma yogam asaktaha sa vishishyate. Yah, one who too, but indriyani senses, manasa by the mind, niyamya regulating, arabhate begins, Arjuna, O Arjuna, karm indriya by the active sense organs, karma yogam devotion, asaktaha without attachment, sa hi vishishyate by far the better. On the other hand, he who controls the senses by the mind and engages his active organs in work of devotion without attachment is by far superior. So in the purport, Swami Srila Prabhupada explains, instead of becoming a pseudo-transcendentalist for the sake of wanton living and sense enjoyment, it is far better to remain in one's own business and execute the purpose of life, which is to get free from material bondage and enter into the kingdom of God. The prime svartha-gati or goal of self-interest is to reach Vishnu. The whole institution of Varna and Ashrama is designed to help us reach this goal of life. A householder can also reach this destination by regulated service in Krishna consciousness. For self-realization, one can live a controlled life as prescribed in the sastras and continue carrying out his business without attachment, and in that way make progress. Such a sincere person who follows this method is far better situated than the false pretender who adopts show bottle spiritualism to cheat the innocent public. A sincere sweeper in the street is far better than the charlaton meditator who meditates only for the sake of making a living. So very beautiful verse and so many concepts explained in the small purport by Swami Srila Prabhupada. So Lord Shri Krishna, he is trying to explain in the previous verse, Lord Shri Krishna explained that those who restrains the senses and organs of actions, so there are Jnanindriya and Karmindriya, 5 knowledge acquiring senses and 5 senses of actions. So there are Jnanindriya and Karmindriya. So one who restrains his senses and organs of action, but in his mind, if he always contemplates on sense gratification, on objects of sense gratification, and he is always making plans for better material life, and he makes a show of yogic meditation, then he is a pretender. On the other hand, Lord Shri Krishna is trying to explain, Yastva indriyani manasa. A person who controls the mind is part of the subtle body and is superior to the gross body, gross senses, knowledge acquiring senses and the working organs. So if a person controls the senses, if a person controls the senses by his mind, manasa niyamya, arabate Arjuna. Lord Shri Krishna is saying to Arjun ji, oh Arjuna, if a person controls his senses by the mind and begins, what he begins? Karma yoga. If one engages his active sense organs, कर्म इंद्रिय है कर्म योगम कर्म इंद्रिय है कर्म योगम asaktaha without attachment. So in the previous verses, in the previous chapter, second chapter also, Lord Shri Krishna explained, then it becomes yoga, best yoga. If one does his prescribed duties, if one engages in his occupational duties without attachment, the whole Varna and Ashrama institution, Swami Srila Prabhupada explained in the purport, is to help one progress on the path of spirituality, is to free one from the material bondage. So Lord Shri Krishna, he is explaining karmendriye hai karma yogam asaktaha, without attachment. Sukhe dukhe same kritva labho jaya jayo. If one execute his prescribed duties, occupational duties without attachment and engages his active organs in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord, then that is savishishyate asaktaha. If one execute his business, if one execute his prescribed duties without attachment and engages his active senses in the service of the Supreme Lord, so it is far better than a person who renounces work. The senses, the active organs are also part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and they are meant for serving. So that is Buddhi Yoga. If one understands that the soul is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, every living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, the senses, the active organs, the Jnanendriya, the Karmendriya, they are also part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and everything can be utilized. That is Buddhi Yoga. Buddhi Yoga says yoga means linking with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So one can act without attachment. Asaktaha. One can act without attachment and engage his active organs in the service of the Supreme Lord by living a controlled life, restraining Niyamya arabate, by regulation. If one controls, if one lives a controlled life and does a regulated devotional service, engages himself, his organs, his active organs in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord, then he is savishishyate vishesh. Lord Shri Krishna is saying he is far better than a renunciant, a pseudo transcendentalist. Swami Srila Prabhupada wrote in the purport, for wanton living, one who makes a show of spirituality, one who makes a show of meditation, for wanton living, for getting followers, for making a living. And Swami Srila Prabhupada wrote in the purport, charlaton meditator. So rather than becoming a pseudo transcendentalist, a charlatan meditator, it is much better to remain in one's own occupation, in one's own business. The 4 Varna and 4 Ashrama are meant for spiritual progress, are meant to help one fulfill the purpose of the human life, fulfill the purpose of life. And the purpose of the life, Swami Srila Prabhupada explained in the purport, is to become free, is to get free from the material bondage and enter into the kingdom of the Supreme Lord. No one, especially people in this age of Kali, they do not know. The conclusion of the scriptures is that the goal of self-interest, one real self-interest, nate vidu, svartha-gatim hi Vishnu, nate vidu, people do not understand. Especially in this age of Kali, because people do not have access to the spiritual knowledge, because people do not have access to scriptures, especially in this age of Kali. So for the benefit of everyone, Lord Shri Krishna is speaking transcendental knowledge. Bhagavad Gita for the benefit of whole humanity, and Lord Shri Krishna is trying to explain a person who engages, one who controls niyamya arabate yastva indriyani manasa. If one controls, one controls his senses through his mind and engages his active organs, karmindriye, karma yogam, in the actions of yoga, karma yoga. When actions are done for the supreme person, for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, then it becomes yoga. As explained by Lord Shri Krishna in the previous chapter, if one gives up the fruits of actions, if one is not attached to the fruits of the action, and one works with such an intelligence, with such consciousness, and Lord Shri Krishna again here he is saying asaktaha, without attachment. सुखे दुखे समय समय कृत्वा लाभा लाभो जया जयो तथा युद्धाय युजस्व. So if one engages in his prescribed duties, the prescribed duties are also ordained by the scriptures and are meant for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, Lord Vishnu. And people do not know that the nate vidu svartha-gatim, the real goal of self-interest, is the Supreme Lord, Lord Vishnu. So those who try to make a show of devotion, Swami Srila Prabhupada wrote in the purport, show bottle spiritualists. So those who want to make a show of meditation, charlatan meditation, just for the sake of living, those who meditate only for the sake of living, it is far better. Swami Srila Prabhupada gave an example. It is far better to be a sweeper in the street. Swami Srila Prabhupada has always said in his lectures, in his conversations, he has explained it is far better to remain in one's own occupational duty, in one's own business, and execute Krishna consciousness in a regulated way. And if such a sincere person will surely make advancement in spiritual life and can also fulfill the purpose of life, the goal of human life, which is to get free from the material bondage and enter into the kingdom of the Supreme Lord. So yastva indriyani manasa niyamya arabate Arjuna karmendriye karma yogam asaktaha savishishyate. On the other hand, he who controls the senses by the mind and engages his active organs, karmindriye, in works of devotion, karma yogam asaktaha, in works of devotion without attachment, is by far superior. Savishishyate visheshaha, savishishyate is better than a person who just renounces the work and makes a show of meditation. One who meditates only for making a living, for false reputation, for acquiring men, followers, and money, for wanton living. Swami Srila Prabhupada wrote in the purport, wanton living. So a pseudo transcendentalist, he doesn't live a disciplined life. And Swami Srila Prabhupada has always explained in his conversations and lectures, in his discourses, a real disciple is a person who is disciplined by the spiritual master. So that is the meaning of a disciple. So for wanton living, for unruly, for undisciplined life, if one takes up to spirituality and makes a show of advanced spiritualist, make a show of great meditation, divine consciousness, then he is, Lord Shri Krishna already explained in the previous verse, he is a cheater, he is a pretender, and Lord Shri Krishna addressed him as Vimudha, greatest of the fool. So instead of becoming a pseudo transcendentalist for the sake of wanton living and sense enjoyment, it is far better to remain in one's own business and execute the purpose of life, which is to get free from material bondage and enter into the kingdom of God. The prime svartha-gati or goal of self-interest is to reach Vishnu. The whole institution of Varna and Ashrama is designed to help reach this goal of life. So one can remain in his own varna, and one can adopt any ashrama, brahmachari, the four orders of social life, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and the four orders of spiritual life, Brahmachari, Grahastha, Vanprastha, and Sannyasa, are meant for spiritual advancement, are meant to fulfill the purpose of life, especially the human life. They are meant to help one reach the ultimate goal, svartha-gati hi Vishnu. So whole Varnashrama institution is to help one reach the ultimate goal or the ultimate destination. And if one can remain in any varna and ashrama as per one's capacity and execute devotional service or actions in Krishna consciousness, karma yoga, asaktaha, without attachment, and one can make progress on the path of spirituality, and one can reach the ultimate destination. One can become free from material bondage and enter into the kingdom of God, Supreme God. So it is far better to remain in one's own occupation and execute regulated devotional service by living a controlled life, by controlling the senses through the mind, and thus one can actually attain spiritual success. Siddhim, on the other hand, nacha sannyasana siddhim samadhigacchati. If one takes up to sannyas abruptly, and if one thinks that he has become perfect and make a show of spiritualism just for the sake of living, for false prestige, reputation, then that is of no use. Swami Srila Prabhupada explained, and even Lord Shri Krishna explained, mithyachara sa uchyate. So the whole institution of Varna and Ashrama is designed to help us reach the goal of life, this goal of life. A householder can also reach this destination by regulated service in Krishna consciousness. So a householder it is not important, it is not necessary to accept the renounced order of life. Even if a householder, if he lives a controlled life, if he controls his senses through the mind and execute regulated devotional service, then he can also reach this destination. Swami Srila Prabhupada is writing, a householder can also reach this destination. By regulated service in Krishna consciousness, for self-realization, one can live a controlled life as prescribed in the sastras and continue carrying out his business without attachment, and in that way make progress. Such a sincere person who follows this method is far better situated than the false pretender who adopts show bottle spiritualism. So Swami Srila Prabhupada is using the word show bottle spiritualism, wanton living, charlatan meditator. So such a sincere person who follows this method is far better situated than the false pretender who adopts show bottle spiritualism or pseudo fake spiritualism to cheat the innocent public. A sincere sweeper in the street is far better than the charlatan meditator who meditates only for the sake of making a living. So it is 1,000 times better to carry out one's occupational duties without attachment and engage one's senses. And in the previous purports we saw, Swami Srila Prabhupada gave the example of Ambarish Maharaj. By engaging his senses, he was engaged in his occupational duty. He was a king, he was an emperor, and he was engaged in his occupational duties without attachment for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, and he was engaging all his senses, material senses, in the service of in the transcendental service of the Supreme Lord. And thus he purified his senses and became a matparaha devotee of the Supreme Lord. So Lord Shri Krishna, he is saying, on the other hand, he who controls the senses by the mind and engages his active organs in the works of devotion without attachment is by far superior. Sa vishishyate yasto indriyani manasa niyamya arabate Arjuna karmendriya karma yoga masaktaha karmendriya karma yoga masaktaha sa vishishyate. He is far superior, he is far better than a person who just renounces work for the sake of making a living or cheating innocent public. So very beautiful verse. In our next session we will try to understand the next verse of Bhagavad Gita. So till then I would like to stop this session here. Jai Vishnupad Paramhans Parivrajacharya Shrotrashat Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Krishna Kripa Murti Abhay Charnarvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ji ki Jai. All glories to His Divine Grace Krishna Kripa Murti Abhay Charnarvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Lord Shri Krishna. All glories to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. All glories to holy name Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Nitai Gaur Premanande Hare Hare Bol Hare Krishna.